Hi, everyone. My name is Paige Bauer, and I'm with Gilbert Homes. We are a Colorado passive house builder, and I just like to talk a little bit today about trauma-informed design, which may be a new concept for some people and not for others. It's an emerging concept in the architectural space and in the commercial world, but it is not currently practice with like in a rebuilding scenario or with residential single family homes. And I just want to also say that the information that I'm sharing today is coming from a few different places. So one, my lived experience and work in with Gilbert and in the construction space, and a lot of research, and then also my background as an educator, which I have a background in culturally responsive teaching, and trauma-informed education pedagogy. So it's really like merging all of these things together, and just having some, observations from working with clients post-fire, so post-trauma. Okay, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so peeling back the onion, kind of starting from the beginning, just to ask the question, so what is trauma? You may hear that word used quite a bit, but actually what is trauma? So trauma is just simply an emotional, psychological response to a very challenging event that really dismantles our ideas of safety and security. Often shifting our worldview. So especially as we're children and we move along in life, we have ideas around safety and comfort and care. And when we experience trauma or traumatic events, those ideas shift or change or can completely go away. Okay, so when we look at types of trauma, we can do the next slide. We have individual trauma, collective trauma, and historical trauma. So individual trauma would be, any experiences of adversity. So sometimes we hear about that, and or we have lived experiences of childhood adversity, witnessing violence, things of that nature. In the case of a wildfire, which now there's a new term around that, which is climate trauma. So climate trauma, we've just seen this play out in Texas a bit with the flooding. So we have episodes of climate trauma in our country. We have wildfires, we have flooding, we have hurricanes, and we have tornadoes and things of that nature. And we can experience trauma from those events, both on an individual level and on a collective level. So what that means is we can experience it as an entire community. So that's the case here in Colorado with the Marshall Fire, and the same too in Los Angeles, where you have whole communities impacted. Collective trauma also can be passed down generationally too. So that's an important piece to know. And then historical trauma, communities experiencing marginalization, oppression, or deep loss would be examples of historical trauma. Okay, next slide. Okay, when we think about trauma, there's a few important pieces to note. And I have this at the bottom of the screen, but I should just earmark it for right now, that it's important to note that people experience trauma on a continuum. So on a spectrum and on a continuum. So we can't say like everyone who has been connected with a wildfire will experience trauma in the same way. What we're saying here is that we can see patterns across groups of survivors of fire, catastrophic fire events, and some of the manifestations of that trauma. So those would include cognitive, behavioral, and mood changes. Also keeping in mind that symptoms of trauma can be very, very intense in the period, immediately following the event. And then over time, people will recover. So the University of Denver did a study of Marshall Fire victims and found that roughly about 2/3 of the survivors, people impacted by the fire, recovered over a period of time. About a third experienced more significant symptoms that are consistent with PTSD, so anxiety and depression. Interestingly, there's two really strong studies out of UC San Diego. So researchers there looked at survivors of the California's Camp Fire in 2018. So they first published in 2023 their findings that people directly impacted by the fire showed significantly greater increase in chronic symptoms of PTSD. And that also included some cognitive functioning. So where that comes into play is around decision making. So they measured distractibility and an inability to measure intrusive thoughts. So they published in 2023. And then again in 2025, actually just in April, they have their recent study which showed a more significant number. So from the Camp Fire, it's around 67% of the people directly impacted fire, which is a really significant number, do exhibit characteristics of PTSD, including some of the cognitive pieces. And so for me, in my mind, I think about like the construction process is so heavy with decision making, right? And under the best circumstances, people get stressed. And so when you layer that onto an already very difficult situation where people are managing just all types of decisions related to themselves, their family, their children, then you can see how you could end up maybe experiencing some decision fatigue, certainly that, but also decision paralysis. But again, it's important just to make the distinction that that's not the case for everyone. So some people can come out of a fire situation. We had clients like this who were able to, so they viewed the situation as an opportunity to do something different that aligned with their values and their attitudes and their beliefs. And also, in this situation, and they chose passive house, right? And, but then we have other folks who just are trying to get through, the space and manage these other things going on. Next slide, please. Thank you. The concept of trauma-informed design is grounded and rooted in trauma-informed care, which is from the medical field. So this is all rooted in healthcare and social services. Trauma-informed care, there's 6 guiding principles that I included here because I feel like, well, it's good to know where things are housed or where they come from. This is well documented, well researched, and it's really common practice in the medical field to work with patients with a trauma-informed care lens. So the guiding principles of safety, trustworthiness and transparency, peer support, empowerment or choice and voice, that's a common way to couch empowerment, collaboration, and then cultural and historic considerations. So those are the overarching principles of trauma-informed care. Okay, next slide, please. In 2021, a group of researchers released a study where they suggested that trauma-informed care could translate into the built environment. And those researchers, that was just in 2021. So it's an emerging concept. It is already in motion. So in Denver, we have a handful of housing developments. So specifically for people who have experienced homelessness. And all of those projects are rooted in trauma-informed design. Same thing is true in San Antonio, Texas. They actually had the very first residential facility that was rooted in trauma-informed design. Okay, the translation of trauma-informed care to trauma-informed design really prioritizes the physical and psychological safety of the people that you're working with. It promotes healing and well-being. So with physical and psychological safety, in this case, especially post-wildfire, we would be talking about fire resiliency and indoor air quality, which independent of wildfires is an issue for us in Colorado. We have very poor air quality in the Denver metro area. And that's something that is top of mind for folks. And then clear sight lines, which in this case, they're talking about ability for people inside the residents to be able to, see out, but also maintain some privacy. So that's what they're talking about. Promoting healing and well-being, the biophilia component. So that's really just connecting to nature, which is, well documented that connection to nature decreases stress and anxiety. Soothing colors, natural light, and sound. And so those are the two priorities of trauma-informed design. Can we do the next slide? The third and fourth principle, voice and choice. So empowerment, transparency, over communication, and empathy. And empathy is where, in my mind, this trauma-informed work in construction may be hard to wrap your head around. Sometimes when, when I have worked with educators around trauma-informed pedagogy, people say, well, like, what does that mean? Well, what do I do every day? Give me the list of things I need to do. And so, yes, there are best practices that you can adopt. And also, it's about shifting your paradigm and flipping the narrative so that we come to the relationship with clients who have experienced trauma with just a lot of empathy and willingness to be, very transparent and understand that the piece of, losing control can be really challenging for people. So I think empathy is one of the biggest pieces, just in my opinion. And also, like, you have to commit as a whole, as a person, and then as a whole team to that too. And then collaboration, so with the housing developments in Denver and in San Antonio, both of those are examples of working with mental health professionals, builders, architects, designers, and of course, the clients who will live there. So the same is true for us in this space of rebuilding post-climate trauma. You would have, potentially working with mental health professionals, to community groups, insurance companies, there's a big one, and everyone on the team. So really viewing this as a team approach, a team effort is an important piece. Next slide. Thank you. Okay, how does all of this connect to Passive House? So this is me really just thinking about this a lot, and you all may have, may disagree or may have a lot to add to this, and so please do. For me, Passive House, you already, like we already, by virtue of building passive, that standard inherently meets the design principles of trauma-informed care, which is around safety and promoting healing and well-being. Like, that's already happening. That just happens no matter what, which is super cool if you think about Passive House versus traditional construction. And one thing that came up that we were thinking a lot about in our conversations leading up to the presentation, it's like that whole piece of sound. So clients here in Colorado, we were on a tour where, we had people coming in to visit our passive houses, and the sound piece was such a big, people said, this is so quiet in here, right? Like, I feel calm in this house. And it's like, yes to that, right? Yes. And so how important is that in a post-trauma situation? So certainly, I think, very valuable. But then also, we can all benefit, whether we build passive or we don't, of just deepening our understanding and empathy for working with victims of trauma. And around the transparency piece and the collaboration piece, like in my mind, and what's happened a bit here with the Marshall Fire, is like we have this opportunity too to just for people to hear our message, and that can include policymakers, and just the public in general. But certainly, there's this beautiful space to just open up and work with everyone out in the community too. So anyway, so that is my culmination of thinking and researching and lived experience, and really trying to tap into how can me, Paige Bauer, or all of the Joubert team, like, be supportive of people experiencing climate trauma, because that is not my lived experience. So for me personally, need to be someone that takes in all of the information and then really works hard to be supportive. So that is what I would love to share today.
Now, my name is Mark Attard. I'm involved here in the Passive House Rocky Mountain Group, as well as the Passive House Network in general, and I happen to be the COO of Joubert, CPHT and CPHC as well. And today I'm going to just take a little bit of time to talk about a few of the technical aspects of Passive House, which everybody on this call is familiar with in some way or another, that apply to this idea of trauma-informed design or trauma-informed construction. One of the things that's interesting about Passive House, and that I think we kind of take for granted sometimes, is the fact that there's an inherently built-in idea of comfort and resilience. And we talk about it a lot. But when we talk about it from the perspective of this trauma-informed design or trauma-informed construction, I think it takes on some real clear new meaning especially for those folks who are looking to rebuild after an event that happened here in Colorado a few years ago, and most recently in LA. One of the things that I think comes about when we're talking about these events, particularly with fire events, is what happens to us if our house survives, right? So we all know what happens when the house is destroyed and has to be rebuilt. There's a clear path of what needs to happen there. One of the things that many folks in Colorado and in LA experienced was a house that survived, but really only survived structurally. It was completely denigrated from smoke and toxic fumes and things of that nature. And so these two images that I have up here are examples of houses that actually survived and were able to even survive beyond the damage that the smoke and the resulting environment around these fire events create. So the one in the upper left-hand corner there is an obvious home from the Palisades that we've seen many, many times. We know that this wasn't necessarily a certified passive house, and frankly, neither is the one in the bottom of the right-hand corner, which is my personal house, which was involved in the Marshall fires, or my neighborhood was involved in the Marshall fires. But the thing that's important about these houses is that they took passive house principles and they applied them. And what it allowed us to do after these fires is to immediately move back into our houses, into a secure environment that we were used to, and be able to live on a day-to-day basis. And some of the reasons for this have to do with very basic passive house principles that most people know on this on this call, but I think it's important to reemphasize. And that has to do primarily with our simple form factors that help produce that energy efficiency of the house and have many other benefits. But it also has a fire resilience aspect to it because we're dealing with less corners, we're dealing with less overhangs, we're dealing with many less penetrations, as you can see in this example here, that help keep that house in line with what the intention was, which is to have some durability and some reliance through these types of climate events. I think the biggest one of the particularly with a fire event, one of the biggest advantages that passive house brings to the table, of course, is air tightness. And we've now kind of taken to calling that smoke tightness or smoke safety type of construction, where we have 5 times greater air tightness than what a code-built home is. Now that obviously that has some obvious positive effects in normal in normal times where we have a reduced energy losses, we have more control of our indoor air quality and our indoor environment. But during fires and these smoke events, obviously we are preventing that toxic air from getting into the house, or at least minimizing it to the point that we can control that air on the inside, and we can add a mechanical fresh air system to control that and create a safe space in general for folks that are experiencing these types of events. The other thing about passive house that's just a natural part of the methodology is the fact that we're reducing the penetrations that occur from outside to inside of the building. The more we can, the more we reduce that, the more we're limiting the opportunity for these houses to burn. Mainly, as we've discovered in the LA fires and in the Marshall fires, we understand that these houses actually, the majority of them burn from the inside out. And that's the result of the penetrations that we find in typical construction. By reducing that in passive house, we are limiting the opportunities for the house to burn down during these kinds of events, as well as creating again an opportunity for these houses to survive, and then an owner to step back into their house into a comfortable, safe environment. So some of the things that we're seeing and some of the things that we know that again come from typical passive house that was never really part of the program or the thought until we started having these fire events on a regular basis, is what we do with the penetrations that we do have, right? So obvious penetrations are glazing surfaces, any ventilation that we do have, even though we primarily can build a house with no ventilation in the roof. Sometimes it's necessary to do so. So what are we doing there to protect those penetrations that we do have? As far as roofs are concerned, you guys are probably familiar by now with the fact that you can buy vents that will close down during a fire event, during a heat event, to prevent embers from being sucked into that house. So that's a critical component that we add into any construction, whether that's a rain screen, whether that's a ventilated roof of any kind. We add those components to again create a more durable and safe end result building. Triple pane glass in Colorado, this is kind of a standard for us because of the climate zone that we're in. California, especially southern LA, Southern California and LA, it's not necessarily a common thing to have triple pane glass. But if we add triple pane tempered glass to our openings, to our penetrations, it helps increase the time with which the home can stay standing during a fire event, which leads to a greater opportunity for a first responder to come on board and save that house if it's in the midst of flames all around it. And then, of course, we do have to have penetrations. We have to have a supply and an intake for our mechanical fresh air systems. And there are dampening systems that are being developed that will help shut these down, that are heat related during a fire or a smoke event, so that we can automatically keep that system pure, and then when it's safe, turn it back on and continue to have good internal indoor air quality. And of course, the other very important aspect and component of passive house in general, but also related to this idea of trauma-informed construction, is that indoor air quality and that mechanical fresh air system. And some of the things that kind of tie into the things that Paige were talking about is the fact that we have continuous fresh air in these houses. We have hospital-grade filtration. We control the moisture in the house, and it helps with the temperature control in the house. So during these extreme weather events, we can maintain that level of indoor air quality, which adds to the durability of the house, the health of the occupants of the house, and gives an overall sense of comfort and safety in that house. So at the end of the day, we all know the basics of passive house, but as it applies to this trauma-informed construction, it just goes right hand in hand with it, especially when we're talking about climate events that are related to fire. You know, it has built-in fire resiliency with very little need to change methodologies or materials. It's smoke safe because it's airtight. Obviously, we're also building an ultra energy efficient building, which contributes to low operating costs and contributes to the general well-being of the folks who own the house. Superior indoor air quality we discussed, and then the big one for me is the quiet and the comfort. It feels like a safe space. It feels like a place that you want to go and live.
Just to sort of piggyback off of some of what Paige and Mark have been talking about, there's a couple other elements of this that tie into the trauma-informed building. And certainly what we've discovered with the Altanina residents and the Pacific Palisades residents is a much different decision-making process with this cohort of folks, as opposed to people who have been sort of saving their, putting their savings together for many years, or to go and build their dream house, and they're coming into this process with a tremendous amount of enthusiasm and excitement. A lot of these folks, they were taken out at the knees by this fire, and this is a huge shock to them. They're just trying to figure it out. So there's a lot of the things Paige and Mark were talking about in terms of trust, in terms of safety, in terms of security. Those really inform this process. We've also learned that there's a bit of patience involved in this process, as these folks are moving much slower, not across the board, but in most cases through that decision tree, than someone who is coming into this again with a great amount of enthusiasm. One of the other things we're seeing are working with our design team, the huge array of decisions that are involved in the F&F for a house, which is in the hundreds. If we can provide more of a guided design experience or a curated design experience for those folks, not limiting their design choices per se, but guiding them and perhaps giving them an array of choices. Choose from these, these four sort of F&F options, as opposed to here's 400 decisions you have to make. When they're already trying to figure out what their housing situation might look like as they're moving from a friend's place to a rental unit, moving from, I mean, there's so many, the number of factors for people that have been displaced by the fires, they're just enormous. So a lot of those things are at play here. And then when we're coming back to maximizing passive house value, and we're looking at ways to maximize what that certification actually means, make something really additive, but also it ties back into the trauma in terms of trust. So if you're looking at feeling that endorsement or that trust via industry, via government, municipality, through subsidies or through incentives, and also through, we're looking at one of the things we've been working on very hard at Joubert is creating an home insurance carve out for passive house, for a certified passive house. So initially, and I know the Passive House Network and Passive House California and Bronwyn and a whole bunch of other people that may be on this call are associated with this. Susie, Ken, others have been working on this as well. So we're not certainly doing this unilaterally or all on our own. This is a team effort. And I would encourage anyone who's on this, who has thoughts, insights, any relationship capital they can bring to this conversation, please feel free to reach out to me or others on this call, or on this after this conversation. But I initially reached out to the State Insurance Commissioner's Office, Ricardo Lara, and they were super enthusiastic. Very happy to be looking for a political win after the recent fire events. But that process has been very slow. I wanted to have them act as sort of midwife a conversation with farmers and State Farm and Allstate and the big carriers. We discovered after several conversations with folks at carriers and some governmental figures, people at the insurance commissioner's office, and some contacts through Green Builder Media and other places, that maybe the better thing to do was to go to the insurance carriers directly and look for a carve-out product, something we have now done. And I can relay that we've had some success with a couple of carriers. It's still in process, but to give you some insight to how far away from this being done it was, there's a platform that all the insurers use, the actuaries use to gauge insurability and in pricing. And that's across the board with all the insurance companies. And that platform didn't even have within its drop-down menus the options that Passive House provides. So they really had no methodology whatsoever for creating a pricing structure for passive. It would have never happened. So we're now getting those elements added to the menu of options that those insurance companies have to create a product for passive. Here, and I can certainly looking at the resilience aspect of Passive House. We all know that there's so much tremendous crossover between the 7A rules, which are the fire wildland, the WIWI rules, the wildfire adjacent areas in California, with the Class A roof, the cladding, the multi-pane tempered glass. Lots of crossover with Passive House, as Mark has already identified, and Paige. But the one thing that the insurance companies really didn't seem to have a handle on was the airtight envelope. This was the piece that seems to have kind of really got them to listen, because they're now dealing with thousands of people in Altadena and the Palisades whose who've had all this fire damage. Even homes that did not burn, they're dealing with a massive smoke infiltration issue. And the passive house airtight envelope, as Mark and Paige have alluded to, really creates a barrier to that smoke infiltration. I personally have friends in the Palisades who, on Chautauqua, right off the Alphabet Streets, who did not lose their home, but they're now having to go back into the house, take it down to the studs, encapsulate their internal, the framing internally. Everything that wasn't steel, metal, or glass in the house is a loss. And the insurance company has no sense of how to quantify that in terms of compensation for them for their loss. They're going to be battling with that carrier for months to come. So having a product that provides this kind of smoke resilience is huge, and it's really been the game changer in terms of getting the carriers to understand this. You know, we're and then in terms of some of the other incentives that we bring with Passive House that we're bringing into these communities. I mean, one of the other things we're doing is we're talking to some of these organizations, particularly in Altadena, that are nonprofits that have found themselves with a fairly sizable amount of money post-fire from donations and grants, and looking at how to best deploy the money into the community. And one of the things that they're doing is they're land banking, and they're buying up lots, specifically in Altadena, to make sure that those communities stay in some ways the way they were prior to the fires. So we've been in touch with those organizations, and what they're looking to do is build back and then provide those homes back to the community at a slightly below market price to ensure community continuity. We're actively in communication with those organizations to look at the best product they can provide, which is, in our opinion, is Passive House. One, for its fire resiliency. Two, for some of the opportunities we're looking at with certification. I mean, some of the things we've discovered, certainly is those reduced premiums, greater insurability. As we all know, anyone who's on this call from California knows we've had a home insurance crisis in California for years. It predates these fires. But with Passive House, there's a few things. Because of the meticulous documentation that is required when building a Passive House, there's a lot of data for the insurers to look at. So we are looking at, they have a lot of ways to verify this home is built the way that we are presenting the home as being built. We can provide that data on an individual basis. They're looking at potentially expedited claims processing, again, because of the noted benefits with resiliency, but also because of that documentation. Potential for some specialized coverage, which would mean some expanded coverage options. And then we're talking about some of the assistance and grants. I know that Passive House California, again, Bronwyn, Ken, Susie, others have been working on with the utilities for some grants and incentives, 20,000, 30,000, 15,000, potentially through RISE for doing all electric. Some of those grants are stackable, so they can also provide an opportunity to basically eliminate whatever pricing delta exists between a classic code build house and a Passive House, which, to be honest, in these fire areas with the 7A rules that now are in place, that price delta almost doesn't exist anyway. One of the other things we're trying to do now that some of the with this new legislation that has just gone through has removed some of the tax benefits for solar, and or are removing in the coming days, and for some of the other green incentives that are going away. We're starting to engage with some of the larger lenders, again, looking at potentially a mortgage product carve out for certified passive based on things like the enhanced resale value, studies by Bankrate, Santander in Europe, but Bankrate within the US and other organizations have just, there's a 10 to 15% in many cases pricing incentive on resale for a certified passive house. So there's a bunch of reasons and a bunch of incentives that we're looking at to try to bolster our work in these communities. I mention all these things to piggyback the trauma-informed conversation because, again, we're trying to show this particular cohort of clients and people rebuilding, again, safety, security, comfort with the house, and then also by showcasing industry, government, and um, um, and other organizations trust and confidence in Passive House by providing these incentives and carve-outs, again, giving them a sense of security and comfort coming into something that might be very new to them, which is Passive House.
And if you're not actively a supporter of Passive House, you can be one by first becoming signing up for a newsletter, having a membership as an individual or an organization. Become a sponsor, it's also very helpful, and you can also be a volunteer. If you want to reach us, please contact us via info@passivehousecad.org. And obviously, like I said, share what you have learned today, be the difference. It's going to be a better world if we are able to share this information as much as possible.